part 2 of the love story of Zaynab and her husband Abu Alas. And in my last video I mentioned that Zaynab became a Muslim. Her husband accepted this. He did not have an issue with it, but he himself did not become a Muslim. And despite receiving pressure from the Meccans to divorce Zaynab, he did not divorce her. And in this early period of Islam, there was no rule to say that a Muslim woman who is in wedlock with a non-Muslim man should leave him. So that came about afterwards. So the persecution of the Quraysh. Once the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ started spreading Islam openly, the Muslims suffered greatly, and this included his family and his daughters, Zaynab, Kulthum, Ruqayya and Fatima. They were not spared of these hardships. The Quraysh used all sorts of tactics to hurt and torture the Muslims. This was to discourage other people from accepting Islam, so to discourage them from becoming Muslims. Eventually, after 7 years, the Muslims and some non-Muslim supporters were forced to leave Mecca and go and live in the valley of Abu Talib. Here, the groups faced intolerable conditions for a long time. The Quraysh imposed a severe boycott, a severe social boycott, and banned all kinds of contact with the Muslims. They even forced Meccans not to talk to them. Even though these people were Meccans themselves that became Muslim and were forced to move, but the people of the Quraysh that were in Mecca, they did not want other people talking to them because they were Muslim. They were not allowed to do any kind of business like buying and selling, and they also ensured that no food reached the group. The food shortages caused great suffering for both the old and the young. Some cruel Meccans enjoyed hearing the cries of the starving children. Finally, after 3 years, some kind-hearted Meccans initiated the process of stopping the boycott on the Muslims. Unfortunately, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's first wife Khadija r.anha, the Quraysh increased persecution. And also after the death of Abu Talib, this increased. One night in 622 CE, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companion Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu quietly migrated to Medina. Shortly after that, the families of these two also migrated, except Zaynab. So remember, the story is about Zaynab and her husband Abu Alas. So Zaynab was still a Muslim and her husband was still a non-Muslim, so she did not migrate with her father and the other Muslims. Zaynab remained in Mecca with her non-Muslim husband Abu Alas and their children. Zaynab often missed her family, her parents, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and her mother, Khadija radiallahu anha, and her siblings. And she often wished that her husband became a Muslim and that he would take her to Medina. Abu Alas, however, still remained firm on his belief, so he still did not become a Muslim at that time, but yet he was a very honorable person and he still protected his wife Zaynab despite her being a Muslim. Now, there came a time where Zaynab, she saves her non-Muslim husband. And how did this happen? Well, 2 years later, her husband reluctantly joined the army of Quraysh to fight against the Muslims at the Battle of Badr, a place in the outskirts of Medina. Zaynab was greatly disturbed, knowing that her father was on the opposite side. So her father was on the side of the Muslims, but her husband was on the side of the non-Muslims, and they had to fight each other. Although the Muslims were outnumbered, they were victorious in this battle with Allah's help. Now, Abu Alas, which was Zaynab's non-Muslim husband, and 70 others were taken as prisoners of war. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ advised his followers to treat the captives well, so they were not allowed to torture them. Even though they were, the prisoners were non-Muslim, the order in Islam is you are supposed to treat them well.